the format for today's workshop is, I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit about the product and the features, and then we'll open it up for you to do your own exercises. I won't be doing them live here on the screen because it is a challenge for people to see. One of the challenges with VMware's UI is there's a lot of information on it, and it's not very easy to see from far away. So Christian and I will be roaming, and we're happy to answer any questions, either related to the content you're doing right now, other questions you might have about vSAN or your use cases for vSAN, as well as obviously technical issues you're having with instructions in the lab. Okay, and also we'll open the mic for Q&A once or twice, and we'd love to have some feedback or some questions based on what you know or what you'd like to know about vSAN. All right, so I think we'll get started. All right, so good morning. My name is Jim LaFollette. I am a long-term VMware employee. I've been here since 2006. I've worked with vSAN since 5.5 when we initially released the product. I'm joined here on this lab by my associate Christian, over there, Christian Lamson, and maybe someone else will float in, Diane. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we put this lab together, what you'll experience today, and the other thing I want to mention is in today's session, we do have Tushar here from our product team. He is going to observe some of your interactions with the product, possibly ask for some feedback, and on the usability and your experience navigating through the user interface, and afterwards there may even be prizes for those who participate in that, all right? So that's a bonus for today's workshop. All right, so the team, how do we put this together? You may not know, but most of the people in this room are volunteers. We work at VMware, we have a day job, but we volunteer our time to put together the content for this show. And there are some folks, if you see them, they're wearing a black shirt, that generally means their full-time job is to power VMware labs and other aspects. But if we're wearing, I know it's hard to see, if they're wearing like a Navy shirt, like me and Christian, we're volunteers. We work in the field, we work with customers, you know, we could just as easily be your TAM or your VMware systems engineer, but we volunteer to put this content together. So my team is, you know, these four folks. I'm from Massachusetts, Diane is from California, Christian's from Texas, and one of our teammates who wasn't able to travel here, John Brown, is actually from Ireland. All right? So we work together. We start doing this about in February to get ready to have this available in well QA'd and able to operate at scale reliably here in August. So it's a bit of a development time. All right? How do we do it? We use, in this case, we've got 23 different VMs that we put together into this virtual data center that we power on individually for each one of you to take the lab. All right, and this year we did something different. In the past, every lab kind of had its own little virtual data center, but this year, and why did we do that? We did that to kind of minimize compute resources. Maybe vSAN doesn't need as much resources as Site Recovery Manager or vice versa in terms of memory and CPU and storage. But what we did this year is we wanted to use the power of the cloud. We can just power it up and we get the resources we need from our cloud partners. Instead, the precious resources were the people and their time. So by having just one big monolithic vPod that we can support multiple different use cases, it shortened our critical path, which was people. So that's kind of new this year, and it's a new way of thinking, and maybe that's going on in your companies too. You know, there are 4 different vSAN experiences at VMware Explore this year, and there is a Getting Started lab, which is a precursor to this lab. You're welcome to come back and take this when you're done here. You can go take any of these labs in the self-paced area. There's also the one we're doing today, the advanced topics. There's the quick start with ESA, our Express Storage Architecture, if you want to kind of get your feet wet with that. And then there's Odyssey, which is the gamification. Can you answer questions? How well do you know vSAN? And how quickly can you get through those exercises? All right. So now I'm just going to do a little bit of review. I know this might be, some people may already have this knowledge, but what is vSAN? vSAN is enterprise storage that was designed to be integrated with vSphere and to be the preeminent platform for powering and storing your VMs. All right? We take, instead of an external SAN that is full of disks, we populate our ESXi hosts with disks, and then we aggregate that into a big pool of storage that runs at the cluster level. All right? The UI for managing that is all through vCenter, and it also has extensions to support all kinds of new applications like containers and through partners, things like S3, data buckets, et cetera. All right? And it scales linearly as you add hosts or as you add drives. Sometimes people think vSAN is new. It's really not new. I mean, we've been running it since 2015, maybe even earlier in the early access in 5.5. We don't maintain this slide anymore. The point is to understand that we continually evolve vSAN. We add new capabilities based on feedback from our customers. We add new scalability. It scales to the same size as a vSphere cluster. And why can vSAN scale to the same size as a vSphere cluster? It is vSphere. There is actually no additional installation for vSAN. vSAN is been inside ESXi going back to all of these releases I'm showing you here. It's just a feature that you either choose to use or not to use. And choosing to use it means that you install local disks into your ESXi hosts, and you buy an additional license to license that capability. But it's not a new install, it's just a feature check. Just like DRS is a feature check, or HA is a feature check, vSAN is a feature check. All right? So that simplifies the lifecycle management of it. It's not a third-party installation. It's not something you have to layer in on top. It's already there. All right? Now, what does VMware do with vSAN? We really do a lot of things. We do have our core cloud capabilities. We call, basic HCI. That's vSphere and vSAN together, running your VMs. We also package that into additional solutions with additional capabilities. Our full stack HCI is for VMware Cloud Foundation. We add virtualized networking. We add automation. We add Kubernetes integrations. And then finally, if you've experienced any of VMware's public cloud offerings, where we offer our virtual infrastructure inside of Amazon's AWS, or Azure, or Google, those are powered by vSAN too. It's part of our cloud stack, all right? So you can run it under your own control, you can run it under partner control, or you can run it in the public cloud, all right? And sometimes people ask, well, what is vSAN good for? And if we go back to all those early releases, if we were talking about vSAN 6.1, would I have told you, hey, it's the best place to run your Oracle databases? Maybe not. But today, definitely, any workload that you want to run on vSphere, you can run on vSAN. There's really no limit. You get a set of policies that allow you to tailor how you profile your workloads, and you can profile them for any workload. For VDI, you can profile them for database work, you can profile them for commodity storage, and you can profile them for high performance. All right? So at this point, I do want to flip over and just make sure everybody's gotten as far as we'd like on the getting your lab pre-staged, okay? So if you've already done this, you can just sit tight. If you haven't, you can flip your lab manual over to page 9 here by clicking these arrows on either side. Oh, you're not seeing it. Give me a minute. I apologize. That's disappointing. Let me see what I can do about that. So let's get rid of this. There we go. So this is how you navigate the lab manual. These couple of arrows up here. You can see my mouse hovering around. I want you to go to 9. We're going to open this lab prep folder on the desktop. If I can get my mouse to agree with me. There we go. we're going to run this lab prep vSAN. It's really important that you look that you're doing number 2 vSAN. And once that opens, we're going to get this little 2409 vSAN prep. We're going to do module 1. You click start on this module 1. That's going to launch a PowerShell script. And that PowerShell script is running in the background, and it's customizing the environment for the exercises we're going to do today. All right? That's really it. You can wait. You can see what it says here as I click through. I jumped ahead, but we ran that. We started module 1, and we're just going to wait, as it says, until we get something that says we finished. All right? So let me flip back to the PowerPoints now. There we go. All right. So in today's lab, we're doing advanced use case for vSAN. So we're going to look at some features that we have available to us. That's our file services. Something we call disaggregated HCI, formerly known as HCI mesh, and then finally stretch clustering, okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about those use cases, and then we'll jump into the lab. And you'll be able to choose which one of those you want to do, all right? So the file services, this was a big ask for our customers. Hey, you know, you want me to run my VMs on vSAN, but a lot of times I have additional functions that my storage provides. It provides file services in addition to being a block store for VMs. So we extended vSAN to offer NFS 4.1 and v3 file services, as well as SMB for Windows shares, all right? And that's all integrated into vSAN, and it runs in a highly available fashion, a highly scalable fashion. As you add nodes to the cluster, we add additional worker bees to handle those file services requests. All right? All right, and we've also expanded the environments where you can run file services into smaller 2-node cluster environments, as well as stretch cluster environments, so we can make the file services highly available. All right? And then finally, we've added capabilities into the file services so that our backup vendors can take snapshots. Hey, you know, I have all these files in here. What changed since yesterday? And just back up the files that have changed since the last time the backup ran. That's done through either a Power CLI you can do yourself, or our backup vendors that, you know, we have dozens of different compatible backup vendors do that through their API and expose that functionality in their own user interface. All right. What about HCI mesh or disaggregated HCI? We made a big announcement about this at the show. What's the difference here? In the traditional use cases, we are sharing storage from one HCI cluster, one vSAN cluster to another vSAN cluster, or we were having a vSphere Enterprise Plus cluster could access data stores from vSAN. That's what we're going to be doing in the lab if you choose to do it. What's new with the HCI Max that we announced, excuse me, vSAN Max that we announced here at the show is those clusters will not run VMs. So instead of having, you know, clusters that both run VMs and share storage, in that use case, you can build a big disk farm using vSAN and power multiple other clusters with storage and not have to license possibly all your enterprise applications for that storage cluster. Because if you're going to run VMs on an HCI cluster, sometimes those vendors say, hey, you owe me a license for every core in that cluster. So if you built a big, you know, 16-node storage cluster, you needed to pay Microsoft. If you know, even if you weren't running VMs on it, you needed to pay Oracle. With HCI Max, what we're doing there is it's the same technology, but the licensing model and the capabilities might make it more economical to power multiple external clusters with one big storage cluster. But today, we'll just give you a little exposure on how we do that, and you can share storage across clusters with vSAN. What's new in the latest release is actually you can do that across vCenter instances. In the original implementations of our disaggregated HCI, the HCI mesh, we did all of that within the scope. One, you know, cluster managed by the same vCenter could share storage with another cluster managed by that vCenter. In this case now, you can reach across vCenters in your data centers and mount storage. It looks like we have a question over here. All right. So that's something you can experience today. It's a pretty new capability. All right. And then finally, we have some stretch clustering in today's lab as an option for you. So what does vSAN normally do? vSAN's job is to protect your data. We take your data, we create objects. What's an object? A VMDK is an object. A VMX file is an object. A vSwap file. Anything that you would normally see if you browsed, browse data store and you look inside a VM's folder, the common attributes that make up a VM, vSAN understands what that file type is, and it can treat them differently. Some of them it may make highly available. Others really don't need to be highly available. If the host crashes, you don't really need your vSwap file, because the vSwap file is only to back physical memory when it gets paged to disk, et cetera. Guess what? If you come up on another host, that memory doesn't mean anything to it. So anyway, what happens under the covers is vSAN is in charge of data placement. We put copies of your data across the cluster in a method that allows us to sustain a failure of at least one of your hosts or one drive, and the VM will continue running. You won't crash the VM. But vSAN does that placement automatically. In the case of a stretch cluster, now that's an environment where we're taking a single vSphere cluster. If you looked at in the hierarchy, you're going to see all the nodes in the same cluster. But we know that some of them are in one site or availability zone, data center room, whatever you want to call it, and the other portion is in a different environment. And we use a physical witness. In the case of vSAN's normal placement, we create an object and just leave it in different places in the cluster. In this case, whenever we create a virtual machine, we're going to make sure that we have replica data in each site, and then we have a little component here that acts as a tiebreaker running on a dedicated virtual appliance that runs off cluster. It runs somewhere else in your environment, okay? And one of the capabilities of this is now in this architecture with this stretch cluster, if any one of my nodes fail, the VM will continue to run from the other site, okay? I can also have what we call a secondary failure, all right, to tolerate. And in this case, what it means is I am going to set up a policy. I'm now protected. If I lose a room, I'm protected. If I lose a node or a drive, in this case, my VM can continue running in the site where it was located, because I have local redundancy within the site and I have redundancy across the sites. Okay, so that's something else that's really neat about vSAN. You can choose, if I have a cluster, a stretch cluster, and I have 50 VMs in it, I could choose to say, hey, I want to have 20 of those VMs protected against both failure types. If a room fails, or if a piece of the technology in the local site fails, I want to protect that. And I could have another set of VMs that are just protected against room failure, and I could have a third set of VMs that only run in one room. They only run in the secondary site, and they're not protected. If we lose the secondary site, those VMs go down. Why would you do that? Well, maybe you don't really need those, and maybe you want to balance the capacity in your cluster. You don't have to, these do not need to be symmetrical. They're usually shown as symmetrical, 3 nodes in site A, 3 nodes in site B. They don't have to be. You could have 6 nodes in one site and 3 in the other, as long as you're not expecting to run 6 hosts worth of VMs in the case of a disaster. So it's pretty flexible, it's pretty cool. Anybody has some use cases they want to talk to Christian and I about, we'd be happy to talk about that. All right? So with that, what I recommend you do is start with the file services module. That'll be the first module in your lab. You can just keep clicking through the user guide. And when you finish that, you can choose which of these other 2 experiences you want to do. You probably won't have time to do all of them in today's session, but the good news is you can do 1 or 2 of them here, and then as I said, you can come back and at the self-paced, do the remainder. All right? So I'll pause real quick for any questions, Somebody has? Okay, Christian's got a mic. I'm going to put my headphones on.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit on the container side? Container storage, is there any new features or trend, what customers are using?
Sure, so the question was, what about container storage? And yes, vSAN is integrated with containers. We do have a CSI, a container storage integration plugin, and vSAN I mentioned we have storage policies, and you learn a little bit more about those storage policies in the -31, the Getting Started video, but you can actually provision containers and persistent storage for containers, and they can pass that policy down. So as an example, I just talked to you about stretch clustering. It would be possible for a container to say, I need a persistent unit of storage, and I need it to be protected across that stretch cluster. And another container could ask for some unit of storage and say, yeah, I'm not really that important, so just give me a lower class of storage. Don't make me fully redundant across all the sites and everything. I don't know if that addresses the question, but yep. Okay, all right, thank you. So I thought one of the attendees asked a great question, like what is a use case for vSAN file services? So I thought I would just take a minute to explain why you're doing this lab, a little more detail. Use case for vSAN file services. If you have an enterprise level filer from a robust storage company in your data center, you may find that vSAN file services doesn't stack up feature for feature with what that specialist product can do. However, the best use cases and many things that our customers do is if you have a tertiary environment, smaller environments where you have 2 or 3 hosts and an external storage array, you can possibly retire that and just use vSAN to provide storage for VMs as well as file services for things in that local office. And what might those be? It could be a security camera. It could be anything that expects to have a mount point where it wants to write data. The file services don't just have to serve files to VMs. It can serve files to anything, really. And the other thing I'll mention is if you've been using a Windows VM just to run some file shares, you could possibly discontinue the use and the license of that Windows VM and provide more highly available file services right out of the vSphere cluster itself. Okay? Christian brought something to my attention. I just wanted to mention, for those of you who are doing the disaggregated HCI, HCI mesh exercise, there is one step here when we get to step 73 in the manual. We are actually that's step 1. There are some services for vSAN that are configured at the vCenter level. Most services for vSAN are configured at the cluster level. However, in this case, we are looking for you to go to the very top of the hierarchy where the vCenter instance is, and then navigate to a few specific services related to vSAN at the vCenter level. So that could be confusing for people. But if you're not finding what you're looking for in the menu when you're doing HCI mesh, make sure that you weren't expected to start from the vCenter perspective instead of the cluster perspective. All right? Thank you.